This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. On today's program, we're going to give you a very unique perspective and insight into Steve Bannon, the former advisor of Donald Trump, President Donald Trump. And since he has left the White House, he has come out with a book, and there have been there have been a ton of major news articles regarding Bannon's belief system, which leans towards the occult and secret societies. Now, I think that's interesting. In fact, the book isn't really written by Bannon. It's written by Joshua Green, and it talks about Steve Bannon's his belief system. And why I think that's important is because I've spent about 40 years researching these different belief systems. For those of you that have followed my ministry, my books and writing, etc., you know I've been talking about this stuff for a long time. And I've published many books about this. Last year or so, we came out with the Babylon Code that I wrote with Troy Anderson, a Pulitzer Prize-nominated journalist, where we talked about the influence of secret occult societies in the world today, and especially in America. And what amazes me is that, I'm really, to be honest, I'm kind of weary of being amazed because, how many years of my life can I spend being amazed at the lack of knowledge and awareness of people around me, especially where it's most disappointing among Christians. It blows my mind because, as the years go by, that which was considered a conspiracy theory is now front page news. And yet still the mainstream media is schizophrenic. They really are. They're insane. Absolutely insane. But they're not really insane. They have to act insane because they're not free men and women. The journalists that you see, the big-time superstar, celebrity, news media people, journalists, television commentators, radio personalities, etc., there are some notable exceptions. And it's not all black and white. So, for example, there are some conservative hosts of various media that will tell you a significant degree of the truth. Okay, so you're getting a significant degree of the truth versus no truth. Well, I think you win somewhat, as long as you can understand that you're still not receiving all the truth. And then there are the other media, I wrote an article for News with Views a year or two ago. The name of the article was entitled Orwell's Pigs. Now, I'm not sure, the article went viral, but I'm not sure that everybody got what I was trying to say. I wasn't trying to be, in your face, vulgar, and just insult somebody. That wasn't the purpose. It was a kind of inside joke, because as most of you know, George Orwell wrote 1984, and he predicted this big brother society where they would monitor you everywhere with surveillance, and they would pound you with propaganda through the radio and the television. So he predicted it, and he predicted the usage of mass media mind control, where the vast masses of people in 1984 were programmed in their thinking, just like they are in America. And his book was so ahead of its time that there were slogans that Big Brother would pound home into the brains of the people who didn't think. And they would actually believe and say things like, freedom is slavery, war is peace. You know, they would say these statements that are completely opposite of what they really mean, but they're so heavily brainwashed that they actually believe it. And Big Brother, the one that comes to my mind, the two that come to my mind the most is war is peace, because the people really believed, because they were so brainwashed, that when they were in a state of war, that was a time where they were at peace. That's how heavy the brainwashing was. And they really believed that if they lost all their personal freedoms, they really believed, because they were brainwashed so heavily, that if they were truly free and they had freedoms like freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, that they would become slaves. So they were so intensely brainwashed, they believed freedom equated with slavery. You see how it's upside down? But I see the media saying stuff like that all the time. I see politicians saying things like that all the time. They say it right out in front of your face, and they make these totally irrational statements that are Orwellian, like war is peace. So Orwell warned about all this. But the other point, though, is, and I've been studying scientific mind control, persuasion, indoctrination, brainwashing, advertising, perception for decades also. In fact, the new book, which you can pre-order, and remember, pre-order means it's not ready yet. It will be ready soon. I'm moving as fast as I can, then it goes to the printer, and if you've pre-ordered it, the minute it comes off the presses, 24 hours after it comes off the presses, it gets mailed to you if you've pre-ordered it, because a package has already been filled out with your name on it. So it's simply a matter of putting the book in a package, because you paid for your copy in advance, and therefore you get your copy before the general public. So in this new book that you can pre-order, Conquering the Matrix, I deal once again on a deeper and a completely different level about scientific mind control and brainwashing and persuasion, because it's a very important topic. Now, I've dealt with it in the first book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, as you know. I dealt with it heavily in Mass Awakening. I've dealt with it in other books, but in Conquering the Matrix, I bring it front and center, because what occurred during this last year was such insanity. It was so much brainwashing and propaganda. It was ridiculous. So, in addition to that, I have studied heavily, and this comes from my own personal experiences, because for years I was involved in the occult and the New Age movement and altered states of consciousness and all of that stuff. But you continually hear people, especially Christians, insisting that the very fact that you would suggest to them that there exists an invisible government. See, now the term invisible government is not that strange. I've been talking about that forever. And most of the time I was greeted with hostile eyes, disapproving looks. That was on a good day. But now the term invisible government, shadow government, is like out there in the mainstream. And now for years I've been talking about the nature of these secret occult societies that rule America and that rule the world, that began in ancient Babylon. And I still get, I can think of major news networks where I've appeared on the biggest programs countless times. Now, if I was to have brought up what I'm talking to you about now, 3 years ago, 2 years ago on the program, 1 year ago on some of these big programs, probably would have been bounced off the air. They don't bounce you off the air, except for CNN. They really will bounce you off the air. Because I've been behind the scenes at CNN. They play dirty, very dirty. And I don't have an axe to grind, because I'll go on either network, but they play dirty, because I've experienced firsthand. When you're in an intense debate, and I'm not bragging, but I usually win intense debates, and I win non-intense debates. Most of the time, I win the debate. And you know why I win the debate? It's because the people I'm debating are resting on their laurels. They're the big time, whatever, or they think they're the big time, or whatever. Well, I don't think that way. I think kind of like, I don't know if it's still their advertising slogan, Avis, who is it? Avis or Hertz used to have an advertising campaign saying, "We're number 2, we got to try harder." Well, it's not a lack of self-esteem. I'm the lesser known guy. I can't rest on my laurels. I'm not on every day of the week. So they have an enormous power and advantage over me. Plus they control the show. So what it means for me is I have to study and study and study and study and study and memorize statistics and data. Okay? And then go through my mind, map out in my mind a game plan of expectations and likely scenarios. In other words, what I mean is I need to be able to anticipate with a high degree of probability what kind of questions they're going to ask me, how they're going to ask me, what kind of attacks they're going to use against me, what things are they going to use to try to make me sound illegitimate or crazy, or I have to figure out the battle plan. And I have to be proactive. I have to have a strategy clear, like a chess game, clearly mapped out in my head, so there's no surprises. Now, not everybody does that, okay? Not everybody. Most people don't do it. But I'll tell you why I started doing it. I remember the first time I was invited on a big-time network, Fox News Network. I had been hosting the Paul McGuire show, which is different than the Paul McGuire Report, I don't know, for a number of years. And it was just a very successful program. It was Christian talk radio, but we did a lot of politics and other stuff. So we had a massive audience. It was nationally syndicated. We broadcast from Los Angeles. It hit most of the major markets across the United States. And of course, Fox wanted me to have me on Fox News wanted to have me on, and CNN wanted to have me on, because I, at the time, was a player for them, and I could bring in a huge audience if my audience would simply watch me on their network. And they had this kind of like unspoken arrangement with a lot of radio talk show hosts. Now, CNN and Fox News and the others have gotten rid of that format, in my opinion, to their own demise, because what they do is you don't notice a whole lot of really sharp, aggressive, articulate radio talk show hosts that can hold their own being invited on these programs. Okay, there's a couple, but the same few. There's like 5, and they're and even they are not invited very often, and you know their names. And some of them are pretty big players, but they're not invited often. And I noticed that they changed their format. Now, sometimes a network will change its format because they want a bigger audience. In this case, it was obvious to me that all of the networks wanted to control the information, the facts, the point of view, the spin, the narrative, if you will. They all wanted to control it. So the problem is when they would invite really good radio talk show hosts on, and I'm not bragging because I wasn't the only one. There was a whole bunch of very talented radio talk show hosts that used to be on all the time, and they're not. Because what would happen is they were very creative, very good at their communication skills. They too usually won their arguments. But you see, they didn't want them taking the narrative or the discussion in directions that they couldn't control. So, for example, if you decided to go into an actual explanation of what the Federal Reserve is versus just calling it the Fed, and see, if you're really clever and quick, you can get in a lot of information before they cut to a commercial break or cut to the other guest. So what was happening, in my opinion, they wanted to control the percentage of true truth that was being released. So now they have occasional radio talk show hosts on, and I'm looking at myself, and where do these people come from? It's like they come from towns or markets where there's like 1,000 people in the whole town. And they deliberately do that because that way, you see, if your guest is talented, it threatens the host. It shouldn't. If the host is good, there should be no threat whatsoever. The other thing is that if the guest is good, he can control the narrative and get out any kind of information he wants, and he or she can do it in such a way that people take it seriously. So if I was to get into the Federal Reserve and what it really did, people would be interested. People would be want to know more. They don't want that. They want you to just say the Fed and move on. Nobody ever says it to you. It's an unspoken rule. Okay? So I played that game, but I've noticed over the last 5 years at least, they almost never have talented radio talk show hosts, male or female, liberal or conservative. God forbid, strong Christians. And they knew I was a Christian. I didn't wave a flag or anything, but they knew I was. But they have extremely mediocre radio talk show hosts that nobody wants to watch, and their subject matter is always dull. Now, the reason for that is they want to control the information. They want to control the narrative. Now, some shows, the host is secure. The host doesn't mind if you are good at what you do, as long as you don't, muscle in on the host or hostess's territory. But the ones that are insecure, they'll shut you down. So, for example, I remember the first time I went on the No Spin Zone with O'Reilly. O'Reilly was very relaxed. I could say anything I wanted to say, as long as I didn't say anything stupid. If I said something stupid, I knew O'Reilly would challenge me on it. So we got along fine, and he was a gentleman. And the thing about O'Reilly was that when you went on his show, unlike a lot of hosts, I would be often in the LA studios, he'd be in the New York studios, and he would talk to me through my earpiece, and I would talk to him, and just he gave a friendly greeting, how you doing, which was kind of what a class act does. And there were a lot of others that did the same thing. Neil Cavuto was one. But there were a bunch of people, and I'm not naming names, some of them are not there anymore, that you hear lightning in the background, and I think it's artificial weather, by the way. We just had helicopters flying over the studio because they're putting out a fire. Strange place, LA. So the other thing is that they hired, and I'm talking about Fox. Fox hired a lot of females that were attractive and relatively young. And let's not beat around the bush. They were in part hired because of their attractiveness. Okay, I mean, I think we would be stupid not to acknowledge that, because that brought in male watchers, and they wanted, you see, Fox's demographic and their advertising dollars, they wanted male businessmen to watch. And then at home, they knew if the male businessmen would watch, the female business, the wives would watch. And it was a successful formula. But the problem was, a lot of these ladies, and don't accuse me of being sexist, I'm not sexist at all. I don't know if you remember Lori Dew on Fox. I was on when she was on a lot. She was a very attractive woman. And I don't know why they moved her out or whatever, but she was I believe she was a Christian. But then they would replace people like her. They would rotate a lot. And I remember this other girl, and I want to be careful because I think she's still on the air. She graduated from Yale or Harvard, whatever. You could tell she came from kind of an upper class family. And you know, you could probably tell, I could tell, when you're on the East Coast, when you've lived around the country, you can tell the difference between an upper class East Coast accent and a lower class East Coast accent. So she was like privileged family, and she was the editor of a huge financial newspaper journal. I mean, one of the biggest in the world. So you would assume that she would be like a financial genius and a financial expert. Well, this is an example of what I'm talking about. I had to be very careful. I was in New York City at the time, staying in Manhattan, and Fox called me up from their New York studios because they heard I was in town, and they sent a vehicle to get me and take me to the Fox studios. And this was the girl's first day on the job. So they were like officially announcing her as the host or whatever of this Fox financial show. And she had a lot of credentials. I didn't feel comfortable around her, which means neither here nor there. She could have been just nervous. Okay. But I began to realize she didn't really know what she was talking about. I mean, she knew all the official answers, but she didn't know any of the unofficial answers. So I was polite, and you make a choice. I realized she was insecure. I don't blame her. It was her first day on the job. So I made the choice to simply be second fiddle and, be content with it, because I understood it was her first day on the job, and she probably had like a tremendous amount of nerves. But as I was listening to her talk, I realized she, this big financial editor, and she doesn't, unless she deliberately didn't want to say what she knew, but in her case, I don't think she did know. She didn't have a clue what the Federal Reserve was about. So that's what you have in the media right now. They've dumbed it down even further. They want total control. I mean, you watch CNN, and those shows are so rigged, and they're so tight. And if you don't have their point of view, and you got two choices when you go on these shows, because they're vicious. They will, if they can get away with it, if they perceive that you can be their punching bag, if they perceive that you will represent your position poorly, well, guess what? They're going to book you. There's a whole bunch of people out there who are getting booked all the time, and it's not because they're good, it's because they're bad, and they make conservatives look like idiots, for example, but they're always on. And CNN loves that because they use them as a punching bag. Now, I don't come off like a punching bag. And when I get on, I definitely don't come off like a punching bag. And so I've gone toe-to-toe with some of these CNN hosts. And when I say they rig it, I mean, I'm understating it. Okay? I mean, Trump calls them fake news and rigging stuff. Well, he's right, because, look, this has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with fairness, decency, and integrity. Whenever I would go on Fox, I was not shown favoritism. I was given an equal opportunity. Because I was a conservative, I was always debate a liberal talk show host. And they did their best to give us equal time, and they let us go at it, and they didn't censor it. And that was really interesting, because then the leftist liberal talk show hosts got to really say the important and interesting stuff that needs to be said, and the conservative talk show host, which in a bunch of cases was me, I got to say what I really wanted to say. I wasn't censored. So it was exciting. The sparks would fly, but the ratings would skyrocket. But they're not interested in ratings. They're more interested right now in protecting whatever. Controlling the content. So to contrast going on O'Reilly's show with going on, I was on what's-her-name show, Megan Fox, but it's before she made it, and so I don't really remember it very well. I'm not saying anything negative about Megan Fox at all. It was kind of a non-event. She was an unknown. She did an interview with me, but there's anything particularly dynamic about it that I can remember. It doesn't mean she was bad. She was in her growing stage. So I'd been on CNN a bunch of times. So CNN was in Atlanta at that time and had the big studio audience, okay? And so I go to, they have a big building in, it's either Sunset Boulevard or Hollywood Boulevard. And it has the giant letters CNN on it. Very impressive looking. So I arrive at the studio. I get makeup on. They always put makeup on guests, so don't freak out. I've told you this before. But they have to do that because the lights are so bright on television that if you don't have makeup on, your face will shine like the sun was supposed to burst through the lunar? I'm getting it mixed up, man. The moon was supposed to eclipse the sun, and it wasn't very bright. So the point, this is a terrible analogy. The point is that you have to have makeup on television. If you don't, because of the intensity of the lighting, and the other thing a lot of people don't know about television lighting, it's very important to understand, and the reason I understand it is because I had to learn the hard way, okay? When you speak as much as I do, going to all these different conferences and stuff, and people interview you for all these television things, and a lot of the stuff you're doing is, they're small ministries, they're small television production people, and they don't always have a lighting man, and a lot of times they don't have a makeup person. You would think, sorry ladies, you're going to think this is sexist, but you would think that a woman would be a good makeup artist. Well, look, I'm not a good makeup artist, but I have had some women do my makeup. Now, remember, you're required to get makeup because they don't want a shiny face. Who don't know? I had to teach myself how to do makeup. Not because, I have this thing where I want to put makeup. I just didn't. I got tired of looking like somebody who was a cyborg or android whose face was melting. So I go to CNN. It's very interesting. There's hostility in the room. And they don't know me from a hole in the ground. Maybe they know me from seeing me on Fox. I don't know. Maybe, it's very likely because they were in LA, they'd heard my radio show. But they did not like me, okay? And I hadn't said anything. And usually I don't arouse that intense of a dislike. And they didn't like me because they heard, I guess, I was a conservative. And I had to debate some people, and I was very polite to them and, use my sense of humor. So At the end, the CNN crew applauded, literally applauded, and we laughed, and I considered that successful because, you had to win them over. But the girl who did my makeup had an agenda against me. I won't tell you why, and I've told you part of this story. She put my makeup on, and I couldn't see it in the green room. She made it Halloween pumpkin orange. Now, there's no way you can make it Halloween pumpkin orange in a brightly lit room and not know what the heck you're doing. So I get up there to debate, okay? And I'm ready to go. I'm prepared. I've crammed my notes. I've memorized my facts, which always gives you an advantage. When the sparks fly and you can fire away like a machine gun, accurate data, and cite your source, you've won. Well, I had trouble getting people to take me seriously because I was like pumpkin orange. I'm serious. Pumpkin orange. Now, when you're looking like a pumpkin, it's very hard to win the audience. So it didn't go that well. I mean, I had to fight for every inch of credibility I could get. And it was all done because this particular girl, I don't believe she was being sloppy. Nobody could have been that sloppy. She didn't like me. I won't tell you why she didn't like me. So she got me, okay? And I couldn't do anything about it because I didn't get an opportunity to see myself until I saw myself out of the corner of my eye on a monitor when the other person was talking. So, on top of being pumpkin orange, then we get into an area where the studio audience is in Atlanta. And they have a female host, and she's got, 100 people, but they make it look like 300 people in the audience. And they're told to cheer and laugh and everything. And as usual, whenever you do a liberal network, you've seen it, it's always true. It's one conservative, maybe two, if you're lucky, against 5 or 6 liberals. In this case, it was one, me, a conservative against 6 liberals. So, she would always cut me off, so I could never really make my point. The host. And looking like a Halloween pumpkin didn't really help. So finally, I got a little bit tired of it, and I knew we were heading into a break. And I wanted to make a point that it was important for the United States to support the nation of Israel in the Middle East, and they didn't really want to hear that, and I knew they didn't want to hear it. So, I saw my opening, okay, because visually things were transitioning, but I knew my mic was on. So I said in a loud, authoritative voice, something to the effect that the United States of America must stand with Israel in the Middle East. And if we are faithful to stand with Israel, I believe that America will be protected and experience God's blessings and protection. I said something to that effect. Okay. Now you gotta understand, the mic was turned up because they didn't expect me to say anything. The amplifiers were turned up in the Atlanta studio audience. So my words literally, she was trying to announce her break, but I moved through a window of opportunity, and my words, you could hear them very clearly, very legibly. There was no distortion, but my words ricocheted like a sonic boom going off in the Atlanta audience. And you could hear the words, America must stand with Israel. Boom. It was very clear, very, very loud. So, I was glad that God gave me this opportunity to say that so emphatically. And I believe he did, by the way. But now the main female host in Atlanta is furious with me. Because by saying that, I went over her head. That was the real issue. And the other issue was, when I said it, every time let me put this in context. Every time I would say something and start to win the argument, which is, no, I'm not bragging, but it's often because I prepare so much, my mic would be cut. It gets cut all the time when they're playing games. So no matter how loud you talk, your opponent, who hasn't done any research, he is overriding you by pure volume, and nobody can hear what you're saying. See? You understand? So she never really gave me a chance to make my point of view. So I did what I had to do. I saw an open door, and I went for it. Well, she was furious, and I had to make a decision. What was I going to do? So, fortunately, over the years, I learned it's not in the Bible, but there's a time and a place to eat humble pie. So I decided, Paul, this is not a cowardly act. You're just going to have to eat some humble pie here. Maybe she'll calm down. So I said to her, I'm really very, very sorry. I'm laughing. I'm laughing at the moment. I said, I'm really very, very sorry. Please forgive me. I did not mean, well, I didn't know. I'm not lying because I did not know it was going to go off like a cannon. I did know I was going to get a shot with loud volume and nobody was going to override what I was saying. But I didn't know it was going to go off like a sonic boom. So I sincerely apologized to her. And then she hinted like, now, if you want to be back, you're going to have to play by the rules. And so I said her name. And I said, you have my apologies, and I promised you I will completely abide by your rules. Okay, so that got me out of it. But that shows you what goes on, okay? And it would happen all the time, except on Fox, where they do try to make it equal. Now, one other thing, and then I want to get back into it. This is what pride can cause you to fall, okay? I keep talking about laws and principles of success, and we always hear, that pride comes before a fall. And I am a very good debater. I almost always win the debates, but there's a danger in that, and the danger is this is the pride part, you can be a little too self-confident, which means you're a little too, it's not that you're cocky, it's like you're overly confident that you're going to win. So what that means, your pride seduces you not to spend enough time as you should be studying the answers for the debate, not really being on top of your game because after all, you're going to win. See, so your overconfidence, which is pride, is a form of seduction. And without realizing it, you're setting yourself up to be taken down. It's really subtle. It's not like I'm walking around like a jerk or an arrogant person. It's just a subtle thing that happens to the human heart. And we all have had to deal with it, I assume. Or just me, I don't know. So, the problem was that because I knew my stuff on some of these programs and I expected to win. Okay, so what this does, this takes us back to when I first began getting a storm of invitations to go on CNN and Fox. I wouldn't go on the other networks. The reason I didn't go on them is they had tiny audiences. My radio audience was far larger than the other network audiences. Plus, the other networks were rude. I mean, they would treat their conservative guests like dirt. So why should I go on? So it was first starting out, and I just assumed, this is the pride part, that I was going to win because I was a good debater and I knew my facts and I was fast on my feet. Well, guess what? That was pride. So my first debate was, you'd probably know him by face, some of you would know him by name. He was a big Northern California, he was syndicated to Northern California radio talk show host, super liberal, progressive activist. And he was mean, kind of like Michael Moore, mean, you know. He had like a Michael Moore disposition. So like Michael Moore, he woke up like angry or whatever. Anyway, he was a good debater for the most part. He was fast on his feet, pretty knowledgeable. And then I think there was 2 liberals and 2 conservatives, and I forgot who the other conservative was. But it ended up being a debate between me and him. Now, what I found out is that this verbal battle, because we were supposed to act like verbal gladiators, that's what they wanted back then. Fight it out, let the sparks fly. The audience loved it. And they still love it, but they want to control the narrative. So I'd have to say the debate was a tie, but I had to work my tail off. I had to really work. I had to really stay on it. It was not, the winds of favor were not blowing in the sails of my boat. And I realized what the mistake was, pride. I was relying on my natural ability to win. And this is another part of pride that you got to watch out for. I underestimated my opponent. Because of his physical appearance, I just assumed, this is going to be a cakewalk. And because of those 2 things rooted in pride, I had a hard time. Now, it was a sweat. He broke it out in a sweat too. It was a duel to the end, but we only tied. I can't say I won. So it taught me a good lesson because, without the grace of God, I could have just fallen like flat on my face. And it started to happen a second time too. But this time it wasn't so much pride because I was preparing, but I was still new to the game. And then all of a sudden I changed my strategy. I began to tape the appearances of these liberal progressive talk show hosts when they would go on Fox and debate other conservatives or go on CNN and debate other conservatives. There was like a bunch of us that were like the ones that were always on, okay? Kind of like the group that they always wanted on. And I began to watch with great concentration, focus, and intensity the strategies of my potential opponents, their body language. I began to study the techniques they used to interrupt the conversation. I began to study the techniques they used to work the host and to get the host's favor. I began to study the body language they used, how exactly and precisely they would interrupt the conservative host and dominate the debate. I began to observe all their tricks. You understand what I'm saying? Just like in the old days. Now I guess a prize fighter does it by video or something. But in the old days, the big-time prize fighters would analyze and watch over and over again the fights with their opponents on these black and white film projectors. So they knew every move. They mastered every move and trained themselves to be able to win by studying intensively, by spending endless hours watching on a film projector the moves of their boxing opponents, which is what you would think, by the way, guys running for president of the United States in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, you would think it's the biggest job in the land that they would do the same thing, but obviously they don't. So I realized that I couldn't see, it got rid of the pride. The pride was thinking, oh, I can win. No. Now it was, Paul, if you want to win, you're going to have to pay the price. That means you're going to have to buckle down. You're going to have to study their moves, their remarks, their techniques, their strategies, their one-liners, because that is more important almost than the content. How they maneuver themselves, how they get the camera to switch from you to them in a one-liner. You understand what I'm saying? How they get the camera to give them a close-up and the camera pulls away from you so they get to drive their point home. This is all an art form. So I studied and I studied and I studied all my opponents, and I continued to do it for over a decade. So guess what happened? Persistence, training, diligence, humility pays off. I had my wife help me because she would catch things that I didn't catch. So I had mapped in my mind, and we practiced it. I had a response for all the curveballs. I had a strategy. So guess what happens? I get invited back on, I think it was Fox, I can't remember, one of the biggest shows, and they liked our last debate so much, where it was basically a tie, but it was fireworks for the whole 15 minutes. They used to give us 15 minutes to debate because there'd be fireworks and people would like it. And they liked it. They liked it so much that they had us on again. Now, I'm glad they liked it so much, but hey, I could have crashed and burned easily. One knockout punch and I would have been out of the ring. So this time I'm prepared. He hasn't changed. He's assuming like I used to assume, that he's good, he's talented, he's gifted, and no problem. But this time I know what he's going to do before he's going to do it. And I keep using a boxing metaphor because that's what comes into my mind. I hit him. The idea is not to be rude. It's to play fair. But when it's time to strike a punch, you strike a punch. So I disarmed his arguments. I broke his credibility. That threw him off because he was used to winning. Pride. Well, I'm not judging him because I was guilty of it myself. So this was the key. When about a third way into the debate, he began to realize he was losing consistently. He was taking one hit after another by me. And Fox loved it because they kept giving me more airtime, more face time. And finally, we were closing in towards the end. I hit him with a knockout punch line. And right on camera. Now, and the reason he's not doing as well is because about halfway through it, he's losing his temper. And because he's lost his temper, he's not thinking clearly. And I don't see myself any better than him. It's just that I learned my lesson. So the closing scene of the debate is the camera is right on him, close up, waiting for him to make the final remark because he got pulverized by me so many times. They wanted to obligatorily give him the final say-so. The camera's on him. He totally loses his temper. He takes his headphones off, holds them up in the air in a temper tantrum, and throws the headphones and knocks the microphone over as hard as he can, picks himself up, and storms out of the studio like a lunatic. And he lost because of that. I mean, that was theatrics. You don't do it if you're a professional. But his temper got the best of him. Now, I won because I studied, I humbled myself, I didn't assume I was going to win. And so that's something I continued to do. Now, did I, I rejoice that I won. I'm not going to sit there and lie to you because the last time it was a struggle. But the point is, Fox would allow you to fight fair. So I won fairly. But you would go on CNN and, I would train. I'd memorize the data and the statistics. I would make a more convincing argument. And so what they would do on CNN is they would artificially prop up their liberal progressive hosts to make their liberal progressive hosts look smarter and better than you, even though they weren't. And they would do dirty things from day one. They would cut the sound on your mic, or they'd cut it so low that you'd be arguing or debating your heart out, but the audience and the television audience couldn't hear you because they had the volume up on your opponent so much higher that it literally drowned you out. So no matter how good you were in defending your position, nobody could hear it. And that's rigging it hardcore because you can't get your message across. Number two is, in any debate, there's the point where one person's winning, one person's losing. And whenever I would start to win on CNN, I would notice that they would cut from a close-up of me, that's the power position, and then they would take the camera completely off my face, cut my volume, and do a close-up on my opponent who was giving a weaker argument. Or if that didn't work, and this happened quite a few times, they'd have like 6 or 5 people in little square boxes on the TV screen. And it was like a free-for-all. Everybody was going against everybody, which is it's like an insane asylum. It's hard to win a debate. So, but CNN would rig that also, because they would do a close-up on anybody who was arguing the opposite position that you have, and they'd scrub you from the shot. And they always did it consistently. I could count on it. It wasn't like, oh, gee, I had a bad day. It was like clockwork. Now, I remember on Fox in the early days, there were about, 3 of us on the top screen, 3 of us on the bottom screen, and they got some pretty heavy hitters in there, okay? Some conservatives and liberals. And, we're all debating about some issue. I don't remember what it was. The only difference between me and them is I had stayed up all night, memorized my facts, my data, and my statistics. So even though there's 6 small boxes, and occasionally they'll close up in on you, it would be me against 6. And they would go hysterical. When their hands are flying in the air, they're yelling, they're making their point. But if you saw it, it was almost comedic, because there's one guy, me, and the other 5 are just going out of control. They don't know what to do. They're like spinning. And you can hear the producers of the Fox show laughing their heads off in your private earphone, because they love every minute of it. And you're winning, and you're winning, and you're winning. And the only reason I won, it's not that they're not smart people. They're very smart people. But they do it every day of the week. So they didn't bother to memorize their talking points. They didn't bother to memorize the statistics. So whenever we got into a debate, I committed to memory the percentages, the data I was talking about. And they would try to come back, and I could correct them because I had put it to memory. That's all. But anyway, those were the days of when they used to allow smart conservatives and smart liberals to really go at it, and the audience would get the benefit of a lot of truth. Now it's all, it's controlled. There are shows on CNN I would never go on. It's like there's this lovely blonde girl, okay, who's always sticking up for Trump on CNN. She's quiet, she's polite, she's courteous, and the whole crew is rude, nasty, personal, attacking her, yelling at her, putting her down, and it's like 5 to 7 to 1. And so I'm saying to myself, it takes 7 liberals to beat up this very intelligent, smart, conservative girl. Come on, it's too rigged. I'm not interested in it. I'm not interested in the ego of the hosts. You can be as polite as you possibly can. You can defer to the host. You can be as humble as you possibly can. But the very fact that you might accidentally say something that's true, that defeats his argument, then it's paper. I'm not interested in doing that. And that's what media has become in America. It's now a world of George Orwell. It's never been worse. It's all controlled. And since the time I started, it used to be there were like 50 media corporations controlling these networks. Now there's just 6. And it's basically, we're all against Trump 24/7. And if you dare to say anything that's even moderately neutral, that could be construed as positive about Trump and his administration, we're going to have all the attack dogs attack you. We're going to accuse you of fake news and everything else. And you got these prima donnas who are the heads of these shows, who the sons and daughters of the politically affluent and powerful, like Brzezinski's, what is it, his daughter or granddaughter? I think it's his daughter. She doesn't belong on television. She's just a Brzezinski. And you have Mario Cuomo, the former governor of New York's son, arrogant. He has the position because he comes from a powerful political family. Anyway, enough said. You're getting very, very little truth. Which is, by the way, after doing this for so long, and then doing lots of History Channel shows on Bible prophecy. I did 2 series on Bible prophecy, 7 Signs of the Apocalypse. If you go to thehistorychannel.com, you can watch it in the archives. One's called 7 Signs of the Apocalypse, and one's called 7 Horses of the Apocalypse. And I'm in both of them. And the Discovery Channel is supposed to air a brand new pilot show where I have you never know what you have till it goes through editing, where theoretically I have a significant amount of airtime being asked about the mark of the beast and the biochip implant, etc. But like I said, you never know what's going to happen until it's edited. The History Channel people were wonderful, kind, fair. It was fun. And I would have to say the Discovery Channel people were decent and fair. So if you happen to catch that show or hear about it coming up, would you please email me? Because I don't have time to watch it, and I would like to record it and let my sons and daughters see it. Anyway, this brings me to the point. The media is more controlled than ever before. The information flow is more controlled than ever before. And the restriction on what you can have in the content is more controlled than ever before. So that means, even if it's appropriate to kind of professionally ease in a biblical principle, without necessarily saying, it's a biblical principle, everybody, it's harder and harder to do that. And so there's less and less truth in the media. Number 2 is I'm not interested in playing the game of let's start a race war. Okay? I could make inflammatory statements that might win me points from a conservative perspective of different riots and shootings and stuff. But you see, that's not my agenda. My agenda is to defuse the situation. My agenda is to hopefully encourage people to, in a pragmatic way, love and forgive one another, and to recognize that who's really creating these demonstrations are professional agitators financed by super billionaires who are deliberately trying to stir up race riots so they can create martial law in the United States. See, that's what I want to talk about. Because I want to bring healing. I want to bring revival to the inner cities, not riots. But there's not much room to do that anymore. And that's why the Lord has put it into my heart. Paul, I've given you all these years of training. I just gave you a little piece of the training. In radio, television, feature film producer. And now I want you to move forward aggressively. Think supernaturally, act supernaturally. I want you to begin to broadcast this program, the radio program, on television. I want you to live stream the intensive Bible teaching and prophecy teaching at Paradise Mountain Church, as well as the worship service so people can be ministered to. I want to super enhance our social media. I want to get our Roku channel flying with hours and hours of programming. And I want to blitz cyberspace and the internet with truth. But I can't do it without your help. I need people who share the burden to get the truth out there. And if you want to help me, go to paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. I just shared with you a few of the reasons why the dynamics of communications have changed. And in a moment, I'm going to share with you what I think is the most insidious, evil, dark force controlling our media right now. And I hope and pray to God that you will understand what I'm trying to share with you, and that you would be on fire with letting other people know about it. Because if we allow it to continue, they will shut down all freedom of speech and all freedom of religion. And there are many very powerful people that want to do just that. Get yourself a copy of Conquering the Matrix. It's a pre-order. I'm getting it ready to send to the printer, and then we will get it out to you. If you've pre-ordered from me before, you know I keep my word. And anybody who's done anything with this ministry knows that if there's a mistake or an error, well, we just eat it at the ministry, because we're not interested in proving on paper who's right and who's wrong, unless somebody's clearly out trying to sabotage us or out to get us. We always give our partners or our customers the benefit of the doubt, which means we end up mailing away a lot of free product, because I'm not interested in proving who's right. I'm interested in making sure the person who ordered from Paul McGuire Ministries got what they wanted. And that's the only thing that counts, that we can be a blessing to them. So that's the way I run it. And that's why I can't do it constantly. But I will say, I do call a significant number of people personally. You've heard from me, to apologize. I personally make sure, I personally put your package in the mail if it comes to my attention. And you might get a private note from me on an envelope, knowing it's me. And you might get a call from me occasionally. I do call people. People sometimes have their answering machines on, and or they have a call blocking. I can't get through that. But I call a lot of people. Everybody who writes in for prayer, I try my best to read every one of those. Everybody who emails me with a praise report and or a prayer request, I try my best to personally pray for those, which means I want to be totally honest with you, because we're dealing with large numbers of people. Occasionally I miss stuff, okay? But most of the time I make it a priority to pray for you, your situation by name. And this is the principle I apply to do it, because I know human nature and I know myself. So if I tell somebody I'm going to pray for them, or I email you saying I'm praying for you, I try to live by this rule I've made for myself, which is this: Paul, you have to pray like you said you are for the person that's contacting you, or you're talking to, you're emailing. You have to pray right now, or before you get off the phone, or before you get off the computer. You have to do it right now, before you do anything else. And the reason I have to have that rule is because, like most people, and I'm probably worse than most, I know that if I don't do it immediately, no matter how well-intentioned I am, I will forget. It will be put in a pile of urgent to-do lists, and then I'll end up not praying for the person after I've promised them that I would. And I don't think it's better not to promise that you're going to pray for somebody than to promise them and not do it. So the only way I can have a clean conscience before the Lord is that I make a rule. You do it now. And a lot of people don't realize, sometimes I'm listening to the conversation, but I'm privately praying silently to the Lord. The same thing when I meet people at conferences. If I say I pray for you, I will usually have prayed for you by the time we've shaken hands or hugged or whatever, and you're walking in your way. I have made sure I have gone to the throne room of God and presented your request, because I know if I don't, it'll never happen. And I don't want to be one of these people, and I'm not judging anybody because I'm probably worse than most of them. I don't want to be like many of these people who say, I'll pray for you in an email or a letter and words, and you get the feeling that they'll never pray for you. That's not everybody. A lot of people will pray for you. But the only way I can keep myself accountable, the only way I can be faithful, knowing my personality and my personality weaknesses and deficiencies, is to make myself pray for you at the time that I say that I'm going to do it. And not everybody has to do that, but I have to do that. Because, if you're heading up a ministry, you have a responsibility. And I don't want to be guilty before the Lord of lying to people. And the other thing is, people are looking to you to be an intercessor over something that's heavy on their heart. And you may be, has nothing to do with being head of the ministry or whatever. It just simply may be, you may be the only person that they know that they can talk to about it. You don't know their situation. And so I don't want to treat it lightly. And by the way, I want to remind you, when people write, I don't have time to answer long letters. I'm going to be really upfront with you. Occasionally, and I'm talking about rarely, do I answer a long letter. Because I don't have time to read a long letter. That doesn't mean I don't occasionally read long letters, because I do. Some of them are just incredible, and the anointing of God is on them. I can't put them down. But I can't always promise you a response, because I can barely get through the day doing all the stuff I have to do. But I try to read them, and even if they are long, I try to move through them to gain the general thing you're trying to share with me. And then I pray before I put it down. See? Because as a Bible teacher and a minister, I feel it's my responsibility that when somebody asks me, I'll be honest with you, I feel like, look, I would be the biggest hypocrite in the world if I went around preaching the kind of messages that I preach, and then if people contact me, I didn't keep my word and pray for them. I would hate myself. So that's the rule I've made for myself. Not everybody has to live by that rule. I have to. Because I just know myself. And let me tell you something. It's a joy to pray for the people. Because what blows my mind is I take that. Look, this is not all about me. The whole purpose of this show is not all about me. And to tell you how great I am, wonderful I am. Excuse me. It's about trying to share things that will build you up. So the good news is I find that when I pray for people, or I lift their name, I put the hand on an envelope or something and pray God's blessing. When people write in to give me a prayer request or just an encouragement note, which I read, my wife makes sure that I read them. And I'm usually busy, but she insists. And I always thank God that she insists, because they're such blessings to read. They really are. I couldn't keep going in this ministry if I didn't read your letters. They're just really life-giving. But it's such a blessing to pray for people and be faithful in that small way. And then to get a report from that same person down the line, months, weeks, years later, that, God answered the prayer and all these incredible things happened because of the prayer. Oh, what a blessing that is. I was preaching at the Paradise Mountain Church meeting last week, and, I give I give an intensive, high-powered, I'm talking high-powered, full-throttle Bible teaching that is anointed by the Holy Spirit, by God's grace, and we go for it. And nobody's bored, and nobody leaves, which surprises me, because sometimes I'll let it rip for 2 hours of intentional teaching or more. And you can say, how could I possibly go there and sit there that long? Well, you have never gone there, so you don't know. Nobody's leaving bored, because I'm sitting here saying, I'll shut this thing down and close out the message. I'm not going to force people to be captive and bore them. They don't leave. And then they always stay for personal ministry. And I always open up the end of the church service for personal ministry and ask everybody who wants to come forward for personal prayer to come forward. And then I pray for each person individually, and God moves powerfully. And And what I like about the people that come, it's a diverse group of people, which means we have a multi-ethnic, multi-racial group, not because we're trying to be kumbaya, my Lord, wonderful. It's just that's the composition of LA, and that's the composition who comes to the church meetings. And guess what? We love one another. Nobody's faking it. They all have the love of Jesus Christ in their hearts. So I was meeting this Hispanic couple that looked familiar, and they came up and introduced themselves to me, and I prayed for the woman and her husband. And then they told me something that I didn't know, but it was really a blessing. And when I was ministering at a church that my friend Jim, I'm messing this up, Jim Toll preached at, the Spanish church on the way, which it had 25,000 members. And he let me preach there a bunch of times. And they were hungry for God, and the power of God came down. And I opened it up for prayer. And that means I laid hands and prayed for every single person who wanted prayer. And, you don't remember everything that happened. So this couple walks up to me. This is like 4 years later. And they said, Paul, when you laid hands on us at the Spanish church on the way that night, they said, you prophesied over us and you prayed that the power of God would come down upon us. And we just want you to know that what you prophesied came true, and we were filled with the Holy Spirit, and the power of God came on us. And that was such a blessing, because I saw this couple just really at peace with the Lord, and like their lives had been changed. So it's a blessing to do that. Now, we're going to change gears and get into this material regarding occultic cults, secret societies, and the blatant, in-your-face evidence that's all over the news media regarding Steve Bannon and his beliefs. And you need to know about it, just like you should know about anybody's beliefs. I think you're going to find it riveting. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. And again, we are in a battle for the hearts and minds of mankind. The perspective by which we communicate is different than most ministries. There are some ministries that touch on the things that we touch, but I believe we do it in a different way. And that's good, because God calls us all to do things differently. And the Lord is blessing our efforts. We're reaching millions of people in the United States and around the world with Bible prophecy and an explanation of current events based on Bible prophecy, upon the power and miracles of God, what's going to happen to America and the world in the future. We're leading people to Jesus Christ. We're making disciples of all nations, and we're teaching people how to occupy until I come. And this creative communication is so vitally important, as I just shared to you, these dinosaur media networks. They're totally out of touch with the American people. They have big bucks. They're owned by the globalists, but they censor so much information that people don't really know the truth about what's happening in America, and they don't tell them anything about the all-important spiritual perspective and spiritual things that are going on that are affecting everything, which is what we specialize in. So, truth sets you free, and we're in a battle for the hearts and minds of mankind. I'm asking you to do what I did. The Lord called me to begin this ministry. I stepped out by faith. No money. Stepped out totally by faith. And just began doing whatever I could do, whatever the Lord put in front of my hand, and was faithful with it. And the Lord has grown it. We're reaching many millions of people every couple of months. And it's worldwide. And God's growing it. But now the spiritual battle is at an historic proportion. We either, look, let me tell you straight from the heart. We either win this spiritual battle right now. We either change the direction of this spiritual battle right now. I'm serious. Or we're going to lose America. And that means we're going to lose freedom, constitutional freedoms. That means we will enter some kind of totalitarian state, some kind of Orwellian Big Brother state where they censor all the news, they control your thinking, they control your speaking, they control your beliefs. Look, they're trying to do it already, full speed ahead. But it doesn't have to be that way. Do you understand what I'm saying? Christianity is not fatalism. And one of the things that we're called to do is teach Bible prophecy correctly. And Bible prophecy is going to be fulfilled. We know that. Everything in God's Word is going to be fulfilled. But Christians are making premature conclusions based on not rightly dividing God's prophetic word, and they're sealing their doom when God wants to move mightily. And that has to get straightened out, because if you're confused in your biblical thinking, you're going to be confused in every area of your life. God is about to move powerfully, but it is contingent upon our willingness. Each one of us, the whole thing is contingent upon our willingness, your willingness, my willingness to obey fully the call of God when He calls you. And like at this very moment, I know that I know that I know, just like when I got saved, I know the Lord is calling you. I know the Lord's speaking to you. I know the Lord is ministering to you with the power of His Holy Spirit. I can sense at this moment that as we spend this time together, that the anointing of God is moving through this program, not because of something innately virtuous in me, but the anointing of God is moving through this program, and He is supernaturally strengthening the people that are listening. He's supernaturally strengthening you right now. In fact, there's somebody, you listening, where you approach the program and approach me with a certain amount of skepticism. That's okay. That's okay. But you were honest enough to hang in there. And some of your questions have been answered. Now, what the Lord is doing in your life at this moment, because you need it, is that the Lord is supernaturally strengthening you at this moment with the power of His Holy Spirit, which simply means this: the Lord is infusing you right now with the power and the presence of the Holy Spirit. He's strengthening your inner man and inner woman. He's making you victorious. He's healing your mind. You have been listening, and you were skeptical, and that's okay, and you were cautious, and that's okay. But in the process of listening to the program, the Lord is doing a miracle in your life, and He is healing you in your mind. He's strengthening you in your mind. And the way it's happening is the Spirit of the Lord is driving out the spirit of fear from your mind. He's breaking that spirit of fear off your mind, and He's imparting you what He's promised. He's giving you power, love, and a sound mind. He's taking your intellectual ability and He's rebooting it. Some of you listening were given incredibly marvelous intellects and rational thinking abilities. And things happened in your life that threw you for a loop. But the Lord is giving you a sign today of His miracles and of the fact that He is Lord. And the sign that the Lord is giving you today is that He is moving His Holy Spirit in your life at this moment, and He is healing your mind. He's recovering to you the years that the locust has eaten, and He's rebooting you. In other words, He's restarting up the keen intellect He gave you, the creative powers He gave you, the sound mind He gave you, the incredible intelligence and perception He gave you. You're in a process right now of being rebooted. So let go of the fear. Let go of the, post-traumatic stress disorder. Let go of the arrows that came against you. Let go of them. Don't try to figure it out. You may not figure it out till you get to heaven. Let go of it and let the power of God move in you and give in you and bring about in you power, love, and a sound mind, because he wants to use you. And I praise God that he is going to use you. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. We have bulk discounts on the books, and we have all kinds of resources for you. And you can help us as committing to be a prayer warrior, or simply going to the Lord and asking him, Lord, how can I help financially and with making a contribution or a gift? And then simply whatever God tells you to do, obey, and God will bless you. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. We're going to continue on in just a moment. This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. There have been a whole bunch of articles on Steve Bannon and his belief system, like where his nationalism came from, etc., etc. And as it turns out, Steve Bannon, his nationalism, many of his beliefs, the guy is very intelligent, and he embarked on what he described as a systematic study of the world's religions that Bannon says went on for more than a decade. And he started with the Roman Catholic history given to him at a Catholic military school. He moved into Christian mysticism, Eastern metaphysics. He practiced Zen Buddhism in the Navy. He studied the work of Rene Guénon, probably mispronouncing it, but I'm familiar with this person because this person was a French occultist and metaphysician. So somebody who's in the occult but kind of masquerades as if they're a Christian. I'm familiar with this person. He practiced Freemasonry, which obviously means he is or was a Freemason. He studied the Hindu scriptures, Sufism, and then he saw the spiritual decline of the West. He studied the Knights of Templar and the Hindu concept of cyclical time, the fourth and final era of mankind known as the Kali Yuga, a 6,000-year dark age. And he is rather intellectual in his spiritual beliefs, and I would have to say rather well-read. Now, he also wanted to take part in the restoration of the world. He was influenced by Julius of Evola, an Italian intellectual and black sheep of the traditionalist family. He's a racial theorist. I don't know what that means. That could be laden with who God knows what. He believes he's a monarchist, so he believes in a king. You see, I can tell you right now from reading this. This is a liberal progressive's worst nightmare of what an advisor of Donald Trump would be like. He has studied extensively economics, and there's some things unsaid, and I'm looking for them here in the article. He believes in populism, but being somebody who does research, I sense that something is being hidden in this article, that he's not giving me the full disclosure. So I'm going to look at it a second longer. As you notice, when you do a lot of research, you just follow your gut, and there's something not being disclosed. And I'm going to look at it, and I'm going to tell you what I think it is. Because what I read was a lot of fluff, but I don't think the journalist got to the heart of the matter. Okay, you're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire, and we're looking at Steve Bannon's secret belief system. And I just looked at this morning. I just found this out this morning, and I just told you I had a gut feeling that I'm not getting the mother load, so to speak. So I looked at another article for a couple of seconds longer, and I'm reading the mother lode. So in the Salon.com article, and by the way, I have a new book coming out with Troy Anderson that deals with the president. That's going to be explosive. It's coming out in January. And it deals with this, not Steve by name, but it deals with this topic. And we had a lot of confidential, secretive interviews. And I think when you read the book, which won't be out to January, Trumpocalypse is the main title. We're expecting like a seismic shock when we release the book, because it's heavily researched, and I can't get into the specifics of the research right now, but I think it will tell you about Trump, prophecy in America in a way that nobody to date has outlined, detailed, and researched. And the amount of research hours that went into it is like off the chart. Okay, so Steve Bannon, the occult right wing's lone, strange love affair with New Age mysticism. Now, I didn't talk about Steve, but I included this in the book we did with Troy because this goes back to Ronald Reagan. And I did a lot of research on some of these so-called conservative leaders and their New Age and Eastern mystical gurus and astrologers and everything else they were secretly consulting while wooing Christians. So Bannon is being featured in this book, which deals with supernatural religions in the U.S. And he is connected and a reader and a studier of, like Ronald Reagan, okay? From the start of his political career in the 1950s, was quoting a Los Angeles-based occult scholar whose name is Manly P. Hall, whose probably his most influential work was in 1928 called The Secret Teaching of All Ages. It's probably one of the most influential underground books in American culture. Now, for those of you that follow my research and my writings and speaking, and remember, people are constantly calling me a conspiracy theorist, which is like boring me to death. But here we are. I have been quoting Manly P. Hall in my books for 2 decades. I have extensive quotes about him in the first book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, Mass Awakening, the second book, With All New Information, A Prophecy of the Future of America, 2016-2017. I talk about him in my book, Conquering the Matrix. Troy Anderson and I talk about him and all these secret societies in our book, The Babylon Code. And I talk about Manly P. Hall. We talk about Manly P. Hall and the secret teaching of all the ages in a way that's never been brought to public light before in our brand new book. No, excuse me. In our book that's going to be released in January called Trumpocalypse. And it is going to rock. It's going to rock the world because of access to information other people don't have. And it took a lifetime to develop that access. Now, as with some of our other books, my books, as well as the ones I've written with Troy, it's rather tragic, but some people just plagiarize your stuff. And I guess that goes with the price. I guess that's the price tag you have to pay. But the problem is, this is going to be very difficult to plagiarize because the information was collected from private sources. And of course, there's a copyright on the book. I don't mind if people quote us. I don't mind if people reference us and give us credit. That's fine. But don't steal it and then put your name on it. When we wrote the Babylon Code, it was very disappointing to me because I don't want to name names. Anybody can make a mistake. I forgive the brother. But, it's like immediately after we came out of the book, he came out of this Christian author comes out with a clone of our book, and it's a mediocre clone. He didn't do his homework. He insults us. I mean, get this. I don't want you to feel sorry for me, so I'm going to shut up in about 2 seconds. He steals the essential title of the book because he sees that our book is doing really well. He attacks our entire supposition of the book, which is fine. You can have a different disagree. You can disagree. But he has no idea what he's talking about because he was in such a rush to imitate our book, including the title, that his research, he is attacking the thesis of our book, and his research is like non-existent to flawed. And it's sad. It's sad. Because, these are people you consider to be friends. You let them into one degree or another into your life, and you don't expect that, especially from Christians. Anyway, President Trump was very influenced, and this shouldn't surprise me, and it shouldn't cause you to have a nervous breakdown. President Trump was really into positive thinking by Reverend Norman Vincent Peale, okay, who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking. And The Power of Positive Thinking was basically imitated by, what's his name, Schuller, who called his book what? I forgot. It's similar to The Power of Positive Thinking. And these books have received a great deal of criticism from Christians who are into solid biblical theology, and I understand why. I was visiting Norman Vincent Peale's church when I was in Manhattan about 6 months ago, and obviously I wasn't going there to hear him speak because he's been dead for decades. But I just wanted to see the building because I believe the building was financed with Rockefeller money. And Norman Vincent Peale, when you read The Power of Positive Thinking, which I read, but there are practices in The Power of Positive Thinking that Norman Vincent Peale wrote that are clearly occultic, such as communicating with these with the dead and the spirit God. It's just he just goes right off into the occult. And so the people who are criticizing him based on heretical biblical theology are correct. There's nothing wrong with being positive, but there's spiritual error in Vincent Peale's message unfortunately. Now, I'm not beating up Trump or Ronald Reagan, who was also a big fan of Norman Vincent Peale, because Norman Vincent Peale is a big fan by a lot of businessmen, okay, because he motivates people. But let's be honest, businessmen are businessmen, they're not theologians, okay? And they don't have the patience to examine, all right? They just want to be motivated. And that's the downside. So, but here's the thing that's interesting. In the Salon article, it says there's a long-standing intersection between mysticism and conservatism in America. The marriage extends back to the 19th century when the globe-trotting occultist and Russian noblewoman Madame H.P. Blavatsky depicted America as the catalyst for a revolution in human potential in her 1888 book, The Secret Doctrine. It's in America that the transformation will take place. So, she believed, like Manly P. Hall, that America has a secret destiny. Now, I'm very familiar with these ideas, and I've been teaching about them for decades. If you read my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, I break all this down for you so you can understand it simply. And then I compare it to Bible prophecy. Blavatsky discipled a lady named Alice Bailey. Alice Bailey set up an organization called Lucifer Publishing on the grounds of the United Nations, where they discipled some of the most powerful world leaders in becoming Luciferians or Satanists. Okay, that's how dangerous this stuff can get. Now, there was a public outcry at the time, so they had to move the headquarters of Lucifer Publishing near Wall Street, and they changed it to Lucis Publishing. But they still have intact on the grounds of the United Nations. And by the way, I was on the grounds of the United Nations also around 6 months ago, and then a year ago, and then before that, doing extensive videotaping, talking with people, doing researching, and quite frankly, sneaking into some rooms I wasn't supposed to sneak into. And I saw the Luciferian symbolism, and I understood that these world leaders are being trained and discipled in Luciferian worship and doctrine by Bailey, right in the grounds of the United Nations. And guess who pays for that, by the way? Rockefeller financed the United Nations and financed Lucifer Publishing. This is very important. But the most disturbing thing is this intersection between republicanism, conservatism, Bible-believing Christians, Bible-believing right-wing Christians, patriotic Christians. There's an unholy merger between occult Luciferian beliefs, Republicans, and conservative leaders. And I expose it in my book, the first book, A Prophecy of the Future of America. I mean, I really get into it. Manly P. Hall, The Secret Destiny of America, what Charles Manson and the Manson family was really all about. Remember, he was singing about race wars way years ago. Did you know that he was experimented on through the MK Ultra programming, the programming of a Manchurian candidate? Yeah, there's a whole deep, dark secret to the Manson family, which I outline in my book, Prophecy of the Future of America. And there was the famous film director, Roman Polanski, who apparently was a Satanist. His wife, Sharon Tate, was a Satanist. Manson was a Satanist. Manson was running drugs, and the Manson family was running drugs into the mansion of the Beach Boys, supplying them with drugs and girls to be used as prostitution. And then in my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, I don't stop with the Manson family. I move it fast forward into the future, and I talk to you about Roman Polanski shooting the movie Rosemary's Baby in the same building that John Lennon got shot in the outside of. And the whole idea of Rosemary's Baby is that this satanic cult lives next door to them in this apartment building, prestigious apartment building in New York City, and they're trying to conceive what is called a moon child. And a moon child is essentially sex between so mothers, you're going to want to turn the radio off for about 3 to 4 minutes. This is a heads up, okay? Physical relationships between a demon and a human woman to produce interspecies breeding with fallen angel DNA and human DNA. But in this case, they were trying to bring about the birth of a satanic being called the Moon Child. Now, I talk about all that because that's what was going on in the movie. That was the theme of the movie. Then the Manson family, allegedly, or whoever went in and did it, they massacred Sharon Tate, who was pregnant. I think they split open her belly with a knife. Sorry for being so graphic. And I detail all this in A Prophecy of the Future of America, the first book. Now, but what I've learned since there, because every one of my books are constantly moving forward information. So what you have to understand is that there is a secret Luciferian elite order that is running planet Earth right now. That's what you really got to come to grips with. Forget about conspiracy theory. Flush that down the toilet. Believing in a conspiracy theory is the equivalent. Some of you won't get this because you weren't a kid in the 50s. Those of you that were kids in the 50s, or you can look it up on Google, I guess. When you were a kid in the 50s, you would go over to somebody's house and have a TV dinner. It was this weird metallic tray that you would open up, and then you'd have a microwave TV dinner. How come my phone is ringing with bells that I'd never programmed it to ring with? My phone, my internet, everything is doing weird stuff. Okay, so this is all connected to NASA and the space race. This is all connected to the 10,000 Nazi mind control scientists and the Nazi rocket scientists and the Nazi genetic scientists that were brought into the United States of America by Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, after World War II, totally financed by Rockefeller. And they went full speed ahead into the development of scientific mind control programs, beginning with MK Ultra, which is LSD, hypnosis, and stuff like that. I mean, we're just touching the surface, man. We're just touching the surface. So in like 1947 and earlier, we bring in Werner von Braun, who becomes the head of NASA. He's a rocket scientist and he's a mind control scientist. We bring in 10,000 of the Nazi elite scientists, especially mind control. They end up being the heads of secret laboratories, the heads of secret think tanks. They're given a massive amount of funding. The key man that's behind the whole thing is Allen Dulles, head of the CIA. And he's Rockefeller's boy. Now, you would think that the head of the CIA would be we the people and our government. No. The head of the CIA is an international banker named Rockefeller, who financed all this because Rockefeller was the guy who was bankrolling I guess in conjunction with other international banking families. Yeah, in conjunction with others. He was secretly bankrolling the most massive program in scientific mind control that the world has ever known. Now, I don't have the exact numbers, but somewhere between 50,000 and 150,000 young children were abducted from the streets of America, all across America, and to varying degrees, and adults, and young women, and young men, and to varying degrees, they went through what was called MK Ultra LSD mind control programming. That's the Manchurian Candidate programming. And that, the formula for that kind of scientific mind control was first released and exposed by L. Ron Hubbard, the science fiction author who wrote a book on scientific mind control. He said the formula is pain, drugs, hypnosis. Never forget those terms because they're still active today. Now, two basic mind control slaves were developed. The assassin, like the Manchurian Candidate. The whole Bourne Identity movie is all about MK Ultra mind control. The movie with Denzel Washington called The Equalizer, all about MK Ultra mind control assassins. Angelina Jolie, Salt, and there's a whole bunch of other movies. There's even a movie called MK Ultra, but they soften it. Super soldiers. Now, they had another highly secretive program called Monarch Mind Control. In Monarch Mind Control, they expose a young child or a baby or an adult to the most intense, brutal, physical, psychological shock and pain imaginable. That means they expose young, innocent children to brutal rapes, murders, strangulations, the breaking of bones, horrors that are unspeakable. The same thing with adults. It's done repetitively, all right? They drug them with LSD, which amplifies the effects. They put them through sleep deprivation. They do all kinds of other things with them. Now, the purpose of exposing a child or an adult to the most unbelievable, hellish horrors imaginable is that no human mind can take seeing and experiencing that, because not only are they watching it, it's being done to them. Got it? You really got to get this. Come out of the clouds. So to survive, the human mind as a defense mechanism will shatter into multiple personalities, or the human mind will splinter into many sub-personalities, because the human mind of a baby or a young adult is so overwhelmed by the psychic shock and horror and brutality and rape and abuse that in order from them to going stark raving mind, to prevent them from going stark raving mad, they allow their personalities to split into multiple personalities to disperse all the pain and shock. So you could have 30 or 20 or more or 10 multiple personalities. Okay? Now in each multiple personality, because all of this training comes from Nazi Germany mind control scientists who were all Satanists and involved in occult secret societies, Satanism is a key component in the mind control process. So what they do is they set up individual altars, altar like a Roman Catholic altar or an altar where you have communion. The altar is a different altar, but for the worship of Satan. This altar that is placed in every different separate personality, they put in a satanic altar designed to worship a particular demon. So all scientific mind control goes way back to Mystery Babylon, and it's connected to demonic control, like in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So now you have a person who has multiple personalities, but see, through shock, hypnosis, electroshock therapy, drugs, and other things. They firewall off and they bury the multiple personalities deep, deep, deep within the subconscious minds of these individuals. Now, these individuals with their multiple personalities can now be programmed for their particular assignments, and their personalities have different names. So they can be a sex slave. Now, when I talk about a sex slave, I'm talking about like a sex slave that is a spy. A high-level sex slave would be a presidential model. This is a woman or a boy who's designed to seduce and be involved in an intimate, sexual, but also romantic relationship with a political leader for the purpose of spying on them or compromising on them. A lower level sex slave might be a high-priced call girl or somebody who would blackmail somebody or a politician for the purpose of spying, etc. People thought Marilyn Monroe was a monarch mind control, presidential model sex slave programmed to spy on President J.F. Kennedy. And don't think that's so far-fetched, because the founder of the monarch mind control program was Allen Dulles, head of the CIA, and he personally hated John F. Kennedy. Now, they can be programmed to be killers, business people, or accountant-type personalities. Some of the things that you will notice that I guess you could call positive attributes of people that go through monarch mind control, even though it's not a positive thing, it's a horrific thing. You will notice that they can have psychic abilities. They can be like geniuses in just about any field. Often they will speak 7 or 8, 9 different languages fluently. They may have the gift of advanced mathematics. They may have the gift of playing chess like a chess master. They may have exceptional artistic abilities, communication abilities. They may have exceptional athletic abilities. They can be super athletes. They can be super soldiers. So they can be programmed to be at the highest levels of achievement. But unfortunately, the price tag is this brutal form of programming. Now, they normally, their different personalities can't talk to one another. They're unaware that they're embedded with these different personalities. So they use trigger words, like 1, 2, 3, trigger words to bring out one particular personality. The trigger word, it could be a trigger music song, a musical phrase. It could be certain colors, like you could have 2 people walk into a room, both wearing, having orange hair and bright orange dyed t-shirts. And that would be the trigger to cause them to do their mission. And they always have handlers, boyfriends, girlfriends, managers, people that watch them. The people that have allegedly been accused of, and we can't prove this, of undergoing monarch mind control, allegedly, would be people like Tiger Woods, the golf champion. I talk about this in my book, Conquering the Matrix. His father put him through advanced military, like mind control programming. And you see the weird aberrant behavior that leaks out, like crazy sex, violence, depression, is often a signature that the monarch mind control personality is starting to become unglued, and then they have to go back for treatment. A person who's alleged to have been through monarch mind control are a lot of celebrities and movie stars like Katy Perry and what's her name, who shaved her head bald, and so many. We could go on and on and on. You have to understand something, okay? Reality has fundamentally changed. We'll get back into this Steve Bannon thing. A lot of people in politics, I believe, have gone through this thing. But here's the bottom line. In 1947, We entered an era with technology, mind control, computer brain interfaces in 1947, 1948. Okay? That we are now currently using futuristic technology and have been for 50 years. This is very high-level science. They create super soldiers from it and any number of things. They can also put an entire society through mass mind control using drugs, hypnosis, repetition, shock, the same thing. And here's the point. The point is you need to be aware of the rudimentary dynamics of what is going on, because you're being affected, your children are being affected, your moods are being affected, your belief in whether you can do something or cannot do something is being affected by external sources. And you will not experience the breakthrough that God has for you if you internally believe that you can't do something. I'm not talking about positive thinking. I'm talking about somebody with an ulterior motive programming you for defeat. Many of these principles, not the satanic ones, but some of these principles can be turned around and used for good and not violate Scripture. But you have to become savvy and intelligent. In my book, Conquering the Matrix, which you can pre-order now, we get into it heavily. That's why I got into neuro-linguistic programming the other day, because it's an occult system, but it's used by businesses and politicians everywhere. And then the other books will help you. Go to paulmcguire.us, paulmcguire.us. We have bulk discounts. Look for the coming out in January of the new book with Troy Anderson that will just blow things through the roof. And then, look, everything that I'm talking about is frontline spiritual warfare. The church doesn't want to talk about it because it doesn't know about it. How can you fight effective spiritual warfare if you don't even understand what's going on? We need to train people, equip people so they can be victorious. We need to win people to Jesus Christ. The way we do it is reaching as many people as we possibly can. That means television studios, broadcast television, videos, enhanced social media, televising the radio programming, and doing it professionally with creativity, special effects, and hitting it as hard as we can, but spending our dollars prudently. That's how you win a war. It's an information war. So I'm asking you to join me. I'm asking you to say, Lord, I don't want to sit in the grandstands and watch the greatest spiritual battle in the history of mankind happen and me do nothing. Lord, I'm coming to you right now, sincerely in prayer. And you mean it, man. And you go boldly to the throne of grace and you say, God, I hear what Paul is talking about doing. I believe that my spirit resonates with what he's saying. I'm asking you, Lord, to show me how much to give, how much to contribute. Or, Lord, show me a way that I can increase my income, or income can come in from unexpected sources, and as it comes in, I will keep my commitment to you, Lord, to put a portion aside to put in the ministry that Paul's talking about. And we need people to be prayer warriors. We're talking about demonic, occult stuff. That's nasty, man. I need your being a prayer warrior. I need you to be an intercessory prayer warrior, because our fight is not against flesh and blood. And together we can win the spiritual warfare. Together we can have the victory in Jesus Christ. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire.